Welcome to module number 2 of the Implementing ITIL course, Setting the Stage, Getting to the Vision. In this module, we will focus on the first critical step in your implementation effort. That is establishing the ITSM vision, the goals, and the whole reason for the program. This is a very critical step in your implementation effort, as the success of your effort will be highly dependent on how well you initially set those goals and that vision. Here's a review of our implementation approach that we saw in Module 1. We start with the ITSM visioning step. We then, once we have that vision, go to do an assessment, take a baseline, see how we compare against that vision. We then go into the planning step, which is getting our efforts and our projects and programs pulled together. And then we will implement some initial win projects, of which there will be some design efforts and eventually a transition into some kind of a production state. After we're done with all of this, we will then measure where we're at, and we'll come back and we'll recircle around and start the whole process again. Again, we covered this approach at a high level in the module number 1, and now in module number 2 we'll be focusing on the ITSM visioning step. Here is that same implementation approach, and we've now overlaid the learning modules for our Implementing ITIL course on top of those. As you can see, we are focusing on the very first step, the ITSM visioning step, and that is what Module 2 will cover. Module 3 will address the ITSM assessment step. Module 4 will look at planning and a little bit of initial wins. Modules 5 and 6 will cover some of the design stages, and then in Module 7 we'll talk about transition to a production state with our ITSM solutions. In this particular module, module number 2, we will have 3 lessons. Lesson 1 will cover where do we start. So we will identify some approaches and some tips and techniques in terms of how we start our ITIL implementation effort. Lesson 2 will get into the vision stage, much deeper dive in terms of much more detail and some techniques and things you can use to help you craft your vision. And then Lesson 3 will address dealing with resistance. Almost every ITIL implementation effort typically runs into some form of resistance in one way or another. And we'd like to give you a leg up on that by identifying some very typical areas for resistance and give you some tips and help in terms of how you might deal with those at a very high level. So let's get started. Lesson 1. Where do you start? We'll take a look at this first lesson. It's very important. There are more than one way to start an ITIL implementation effort. And so how do we determine which is the correct way to get started? And that's what we'll discuss within lesson number 1. Here we have the 5 ITIL version 3 books: Service Strategy, Service Design, Service Transition, Service Operations, and Continual Service Improvement. Each one of these books covers a unique ITIL version 3 service lifecycle stage. There is no one starting point. There's really no one way to implement. You don't always start with, for example, service operations, or you don't always start with service strategy, for example. The approach we want to use is that we are going to focus on solving one or more business problems, and then we are going to implement those pieces and parts of ITIL that will help us get there. The key point of this approach is highlighted in the yellow balloon on the right-hand side. Implementation can start at any point depending on what you intend to fix. And it is what you intend to fix that will drive the implementation effort. So let's focus in on what is your particular business problem. This chart kind of gives you an idea of how this might work. First of all, what are the key issues or pain points that your organization is struggling with today in IT? Identify what those pain points are, and then identify which of the 5 ITIL service lifecycle stages might be useful to help address that particular problem. So here's some examples that are highlighted in the table. For example, maybe I've got too many incidents and operational stability is very poor. I get lots of outages, lots of incidents, lots of outages. So here I might want to focus most of my efforts around idle problem management, which is out of the service operations lifecycle stage. Maybe I have a different problem. Maybe I can't deal with the high pace of business change. There are more things coming in from the business, more changes to IT, and it seems like IT can never catch up or keep up with those. So for that, I might focus on some of the service transition processes, such as change management or release management. Maybe management or the financial people in your company really have issues around IT and the costs of IT. Maybe there's concerns they can't articulate services and costs to the business. Maybe the business feels they're getting charged for services in ways that they don't understand. So there I might look at service strategy, possibly service portfolio management and financial management. Maybe I'm just totally confused, not sure where to start. We have lots of issues, but really not sure where we want to focus first. If that's the case, then I really want to look at continual service improvement and use the assessment effort to help drive out where that focus should sit. Maybe I've got some audit or regulatory requirements. Again, service design might be needed to help close some gaps in terms of your capabilities to meet those requirements and make sure that controls are being met. Maybe you're operating with high levels of risk, security, availability, reliability. Again, the service design, availability management might be a key focus. Or maybe your company's wrestling with sourcing issues. Maybe there's a pending outsourcing event happening. Again, service strategy would be the key place to focus with that. So again, it's what is the business problem, and use that business problem to help drive why you're doing the effort and where you're actually going to get started. So this is the crux of our key idle implementation approach. Again, we want to fix a business problem and implement the pieces and parts of idle that best address that problem. There's a common mistake of many organizations that have tried to implement idle, and they start with a process or a tool. For example, we're going to implement this particular tool for incident management, and that's our idle project. Or maybe we're going to implement a process like incident management or problem or change, and that becomes our idle project. At the end of the day, the business, your fellow IT people, the other IT people within your organization really don't care about whether the tool or the process is implemented. That is an approach to solving a problem, but you still need to focus on the problem itself. Organizations that go down this path where they say we will implement change management, for example, and then after that we might implement some other process, typically those efforts tend to fail within the first 6 to 8 months. And again, the reason is that the business doesn't care that you've implemented a process or a tool. They're looking for the outcomes of that. And again, that's why the issue is focus on those business problems, focus your efforts to solve the business problems, and implement those pieces and parts of idle that will best address those. So very key approach and concept in terms of how we get started with this. So again, here we have a picture of our overall implementation approach, and it is within our visioning step we're going to identify what these problems are and what those will drive the goals and the strategies that we want to pursue on our idle implementation effort. Again, you see the continual service improvement words below. What we've done here is overlay the idle life cycle stages around our implementation approach just so you can see where things fit. And the continual service improvement shows that after we implement, we're going to then pick more business problems to solve, more incremental steps in improving and our IT operations, and start down this path again over and over. So again, this is really a program, not a one-time project. You can see in the visioning stage, it's very close to a lot of the steps around service strategy in terms of starting to address what's the scope of our effort, what are we trying to fix, how are we going to pull that together. Service design, transition, and operations tend to focus around our design and transition steps in our implementation effort. And the continual service improvement is really the circle back, if you will, as well as the assessment effort, which helps drive some of the measurements and baselines that will determine what we work on next. So again, very much a program in terms of how this goes forward. Lesson 2, the vision work stage, a deeper dive. Here we're going to take a much deeper look at how we will craft our implementation vision for IT service management. Here's the key steps within our vision step. Manage the vision work stage, identify our business focus, draft our vision, our strategy, our communication strategy, look at some risks, program costs, assemble the vision document, and obtain a vision agreement. The details behind these steps are in the Implementing ITIL book, as well as some aids and support in terms of some of the deliverables included with the downloads that come with the course. To the right-hand side, you see some of those key deliverable work products. We have our vision and strategy, the business focus in terms of what problems are we trying to fix. You may have a program charter that kind of identifies the program to your company and gets projects kick off. You may have a go-forward agreement. You may have some high estimated costs for the program, and maybe possibly a risk analysis as well. Again, this is fairly comprehensive in terms of what's presented here, and some of these may differ depending on the company you work for and how they structure projects and programs. But these are the key steps that we want to look at as we get started in our vision work stage. So let's delve into this in some more detail. The importance of the visioning work stage really can't be stressed enough. As we said earlier, without this, your implementation teams will tend to fall apart or stall somewhere down the road. Management may constantly question, why did you start this project in the first place? What are we getting for our money? Resistance levels to the effort may become high, and the implementation team is constantly diverted to really non-value tasks to justify their efforts over and over. Here's kind of a living example from a real customer. A very large bank started their first ITIL implementation effort, funded it very well. I believe the project was well over $1 million in consulting fees in US dollars, so very large. There was no vision work done at the start of this. The focus was, let's implement, I think it was 5 or 6 ITIL processes. When the team started, even though they were cautioned to start with a vision stage, they kind of rejected that, saying, well, management has already funded our efforts, so why bother doing that? Let's just get started. So they went down the path of doing a lot of the process implementation work, and lo and behold, about 7 months into the project, there were some changes in management, and some of the new management came back in and said, why are we spending $1 million on this ITIL project? What are we really getting for our money? And as a result of that, the team literally stopped all the implementation work that they were working on and started to scramble, collecting metrics, putting reports together, building a business case, trying to justify why the project was started, kind of in reverse. Really a waste of time when you start to think about how that worked. So even though you may have a funded effort, make sure that your vision is very clear. Make sure that the goals and the reasons and the business problems you're trying to solve are very clear. Otherwise, these things will tend to happen, and they really do happen a lot more than you might think. Some of the bullets on this particular slide illustrate typical things that may happen when you really don't have a very clear vision. People can lose interest. They may forget why they started the project. The implementation team may just simply focus on something that's not that important to the business. A lot of questions for management, as we illustrated before, will come down the pike a little bit later on, even when you least expect them. So again, very critical to make sure you start down this path of this visioning and pull this together. Here are some more examples from actual companies where they just skip the visioning stage. Large manufacturing company that implemented incident and service desk when really all senior management wanted was to improve availability and reduce outages. So as you well know, looking at, well, which ITIL process really helps you hone in on reducing incidents from stopping them from happening in the first place, really they maybe should have focused around problem management for that, maybe possibly availability and looking at their overall outages. So here was an example of an ITIL project that just was totally misdirected and did not make management very happy with the outcomes when it was completed. Another example, large financial companies, they spent all their efforts on building a CMDB because they were told by a vendor or some other party that you really can't do ITIL unless you have a CMDB in place. This particular project, because it was so tool-focused and so CMDB-type focused, without really looking at why they were doing this, that particular project just simply terminated after 6 months. Management felt it was too expensive to move forward and didn't see any benefits coming out of that. And in our third example, large global manufacturing company implemented a very successful idle change management program, but the problem was senior management really wanted to cut IT infrastructure costs. So here was another example where the IT idle implementation effort went down a totally different path than what management really wanted to see from benefits. When you kind of look at this, and why did this happen, a lot of these stem from IT kind of looking at the world from their perspective and seeing problems and using idle to address those. But you really need to look beyond IT and say, what is it that the business will really get out of this? What are the stakeholders that use IT services, and what are their issues and concerns? And make sure that you focus your effort around that. So the vision stage is really helping you try to start identifying how do you actually understand what those are. So here again is the goal of this particular vision stage, is we want to get all the program stakeholders, that's management, other IT people, your particular organization, as well as the business, and get everybody on the same page with what's the vision for the program, what are the high-level impacts and costs, make sure everybody agrees on the overall approach in terms of how you're going to go forward with this, make sure everybody understands the benefits from this and the key time frames and milestones that they'll start to see those benefits in. So putting that picture together is really the general goal of this particular vision stage. So again, just to reiterate, starting the effort, make sure you establish the vision and make sure that the goals of that vision solve a measurable business problem. Don't fall into the trap of saying we're going to implement a process or a tool or a database. Those, again, are the projects that historically seem to fail within their first 6 to 8 months. So here's an example of a simple program vision statement. We recognize that science and discipline needs to be applied in delivering IT services. Therefore, we're going to set the industry standard for how these are delivered that is admired around the world, most importantly by our customers, as a reason to buy our products and services from our company. A very generally crafted vision statement. The purpose of the vision statement is that it's really a rallying cry for the program. Your program is really going to be a transformation effort, and you're going to transform IT from however they're operating today to help them fall in line with whatever that vision statement is. The characteristics of the vision statement is it should be simple, probably understood in 30 seconds or less, important to your company, and hopefully helps get people excited about what they're trying to do and instills a sense of pride and ownership in terms of getting there. I would keep these very simple. I've seen some vision statements that tend to ramble on for pages, or they use lots of words and they're very hard to read or understand. Make it very simple. We don't want to spend a lot of our efforts in pulling this together. We want to focus it very sharply and just quickly get to a statement that everybody just generally feels excited about and can kind of serve as an umbrella for why this whole effort is happening in the first place. So how do we go about developing a simple program vision? Here's just a 7-step approach that you can use to help craft your vision. Step 1 is identify key stakeholders that should agree the vision. Who's going to decide what this vision is? Let's pull those people together. Step 2, let's schedule a vision workshop to figure out what that vision is. Once we have that workshop in step 3, each participant can write down just catchphrases on a yellow sticky piece of paper or notebook paper, 1 paper per sheet. These could be sentences or maybe just nouns or verbs, but just let people spill out their thoughts in terms of how they see this program happening. In step 4, gather these up and in front of the group, start reading these in front of the group, make sure you understand what the person was saying, and then just start posting them on a board in a round table fashion, 1 person per item, and then go around again until you run out of all the paper that people had submitted. In step 5, group those items together. In step 6, have the group vote on the different groupings that you have on the board there and determine the priority. One way to do this is, I like to use sticky dots. You give basically 10 dots to each person, and they can spend their dots on the items as they wish. If they can put all 10 dots on one item if they wish to, or they may split that among several items. It's up to them. Once you have that, you kind of have a little bit of a priority in terms of where people are looking and thinking and what seems most attractive to them. and you've got a lot of words on the board, and you can now start to fashion a vision statement sentence from the items that receive the highest amount of votes. So this is just a general way to get started. It allows you to get a vision together within 1 to 2 workshops. And again, don't spend a ton of time on this. I want to caution some efforts where I've seen literally months go by while people are arguing about the vision. Get the right stakeholders in the room, have an organized way of just getting things down on paper, on the board, and then eventually crafting a statement, and then we'll be able to move on from there. But this is just a simple approach that you can use to get that started. Here's an example of a simple program goal statement. Reduce overall number of service outages by 50%. So the purpose of our program will be, we will reduce service outages by 50%. Average duration by 30%. Non-value labor, which is a good one, to less than 20%. That's a percentage of all the time people spend, and hopefully reduce the non-value labor that they spend underneath that number. Reduce overall infrastructure operating costs. Maybe there's a cost goal you're going to. Now, some people in IT say, well, we get nervous. How do we know what the number really is? How do we know it's 50% for incidents, 30% for duration of those? Okay, make these things targets. We will target, a good goal statement might say, we will target the overall number of service outages to be reduced by 50%. And there's really nothing wrong in doing that. It's still very clear to people as to why you're doing the program. Now, you may have more than one of these kinds of statements in your goals and in your objectives, and that's perfectly fine as well. Try not to have too many. You want to make sure that you can at least accomplish and focus on the few that are most important to people. Once you have those goals, put down the measurements starting day 1. So here you see a little chart where we've outlined monthly service outages, average service recovery, non-value labor, using some of those statements in the previous slide. And here you see a current state and a future state. The current state is gathered up by whatever's happening today. So if we have too many outages on a monthly basis, how many outages do we actually get? Let's get that number on a piece of paper. And then our future state, let's kind of show a target number as to where that might, where we might shoot for once we implement our first wave of idle solutions. This way, it's very clear as to where you're going. And when management does come back, and they will, as to why are we doing this program, you already have in your hands what the goals are of this particular program. You've got the measurements for those goals, and management historically reacts very well to these kinds of things. The next step in our efforts are to identify some high-level guiding assumptions for how we will achieve the goals and targets cited previously. At this point in our implementation effort, we're very early in the stage here, and we really don't know which processes, actions, initial wins that we're going to be taking. So we're only going to be stating these in very high-level terms. Probably the first one is we plan to utilize idle best practices, or actually good practices now in version 3, as our approach for IT service management. And again, you want to look for agreement on these as well. There may be some in your organization who would rather see other initiatives such as Six Sigma or TQM included as part of the program. So as we look through this, identify those very high-level approach types of things that you're going to be doing to make this happen. And they may be things such as we are going to use idle good practices. We are going to include certain organizations, certain IT departments within our organization. Or the scope may look like this or that, or we may use some other kind of technique. But again, at a very high level, these are basically the assumptions for how we're going to achieve those goals. And it's be very careful to be clear as you do this, that you don't confuse how you're going to do something with what the program goals are. Again, keep those in mind. I know a lot of times IT organizations tend to make the how-tos all of a sudden start looking like goals. But remember, your goals are what are the business problems you're going to fix, and then focus here on what are, at a very high level, things we're going to do to address those problems. Here's some examples of just bad program visions. These are actually taken from real companies and some real idle implementation programs that really didn't work very well. One here, you see this a lot. Our vision is we're going to implement ITIL to drive the standard for how our services are delivered. We will achieve an IT service management CMMM level of 4.0 or higher. By the way, you see a lot of that in some failed ITIL implementation efforts where the whole focus was around a maturity level, again, not solving a business problem. Here's another one I saw. We exist to support the business, very vague. So again, these are all focused around maybe things you might do as part of your implementation effort. But again, those are activities. They're not really the goals of why that program exists in the first place. Here's some examples of bad program goal statements. So things you're going to be doing. We will certify some percentage of our staff in ITIL foundations. We will implement a certified ITIL service manager. We will implement ITIL change and release management. Again, these all have kind of a major theme in common. They mention what actions are being taken, but they're not mentioning what problems are really being solved, or at a high level, how the company is going to organize or pull together to make these things happen. These are much more farther down in your implementation plans, certainly not at the vision stage here. And again, the one test you can use with these is if you read each one of these, put yourself in the shoes of the business or CIO, or even maybe some of your fellow IT people not within your immediate department, and say, is this really important to them? Do they really care whether the staff is certified, or whether they're trained in good practices, or whether a service manager just got hired? That's a good test to see if whether these goal statements are really making any sense or not from a business perspective. So who are our stakeholders? Another key step is we pull our vision together and our goals together and our approach high level is who's going to be the recipients of our entire program. And those are people that become our stakeholders. Stakeholder can be almost anybody. It could be a senior executive in your company. Your ITIL implementation team could be stakeholders. Customers, business users, managers, even vendors and contractors, other IT employees or staff, business units. Again, anybody could be a stakeholder if they're going to be the recipient of the outcomes of the program, the implementation program that you're pulling together. The reason for identifying who these stakeholders are is that as we begin our implementation effort, we're going to also focus on efforts around how do we manage the expectations of these stakeholders. Communicating and managing our stakeholders will by far be the largest task in your implementation effort among everything else that you end up doing. I constantly interview many different ITIL implementation managers that have worked on ITIL implementation programs, and I ask this question specifically in terms of how much effort they feel they spend as a project and as a program on stakeholder management and something we'll talk about later, which is organizational change. And typically the answer comes anywhere from 70 to 80% of that effort. So this is a very key area. And the reason for that is you are implementing processes and behavior change, whereas software, which a lot of us in IT are used to implementing, it's pretty clear when the software is installed and running. It's not so clear if your process is in place and people are using it. So we're going to have to manage our stakeholders very well in terms of their expectations, helping them change behavior and starting to adopt and adapt and transform to an ITIL and IT service management way of operating. So from a stakeholder perspective, again, anyone could be a stakeholder, and again, those are really anybody that's overseeing, building, supporting, delivering, receiving, or impacted by your ITIL solutions and initiatives. There is no rule on who becomes a stakeholder. One of our early steps here, as we identify our stakeholders, is to do just some very early upfront analysis. First of all, who are these stakeholders? This particular chart is just a good, simple way of starting to gather information about who your stakeholders are. And really what we're looking for here is what's their role in the organization and what's their relationship to this ITIL implementation effort. What we're concerned about here is, are they an advocate of your efforts? Are they going to be resistant to your efforts? Where do they really kind of sit? Maybe they're neutral. They don't care whether this program works or not. So we can put a chart like this together just to start to identify who these stakeholders are, where they sit in your organization, and early on kind of identify, are they really on board with your program? And you may not have the answers to this right away, so it's nothing wrong with putting unknown at this point. But some of your early efforts in your implementation effort will be maybe to have a meeting with these people, or an interview, or a workshop, or maybe it's a lunch and learn, and try to get the lay of the land in terms of what they're thinking. And that will help you understand better kind of where their thoughts are. So how many stakeholders will you have on your implementation effort? You may not really know the full answer to that until literally you start implementing and start moving forward. You may start out with maybe some number of stakeholders. I don't know what that could be. Let's say you may start with maybe 12 or 15 key stakeholders as you get started in your vision stage. But as you move farther down the implementation path, as you get into design and transition, for example, you may have other stakeholders that start to come on board as well. So this will be an evolving effort in terms of managing your stakeholders. One of the things I like to point out, why is this so important? For those of you that are familiar with Prince2 or the Project Management Institute here in the States, there's an old exam question on the certification exam that asks, how many times do you have to communicate to somebody before they really get the message and understand what you're trying to say? And the answer is typically 5 to 7 times. So if you just simply take that as a benchmark and you say, well, if I have, let's say, up to 50 stakeholders and I have to do 5 to 7 communications, that quickly starts to translate into thousands of messages that start to come out across the organization. Now, I'm not saying this to scare people off. This looks like a very big number. You obviously, as we'll see later, can leverage communications in many ways through workshops and lunch and learns, and so you kind of get things out very quickly. But I really want to impress how many times you have to communicate what's going on to all your stakeholders, keeping them in the loop, keeping them involved, because it's just very critical and not an effort to be underestimated. In a large-scale ITIL implementation effort, you may actually have an organizational change team that does nothing but stakeholder management on a full-time basis. Another reason as to why this is very important, and I always try to use this example here. If I walked over to your company or your IT department and I've just designed, let's say, a new change management process, and I did that all by myself, didn't talk to anybody in your company, and now I walk into your IT department and say, here it is, go execute it starting Monday, what do you think might happen? I would almost guess that you're probably going to throw me out very quickly. There will be a lot of resistance. There will probably be a lot of anger. Who is this person? Why did they think they can tell us what to do? They don't know our company. They don't know our business. How did they do that? That is exactly how your business and your fellow IT people will react unless you manage their expectations accordingly. Again, another reason why you need a program of organizational change to make this go forward. So stakeholder mapping, again, this is just a little bit more of the chart here, but these are typical steps for what you might do very early on and probably keep doing as your program keeps evolving and stakeholders come in and out. You can list your key stakeholders, their title, their organization. Are they a customer, a vendor, a contractor, IT person, non-IT, etc. Get a reading on how important they feel this vision is going to be in terms of the program that you're about to embark. How do they feel about this? Are they for or against it? Are they neutral? What's their influence in the organization? Is this a decision maker, an influencer? Are they a non-influencer? Maybe you don't care what they think. Maybe they're not that important. Again, you want to get a reading as to where they kind of sit with that. And then, what's in it for me? WIIFM. You see that a lot in ITIL as well. Why should they care about the program that you have, and what will they get out of this? It's important to understand what they're thinking about in terms of their objectives, because if they agree with those objectives, then they're going to be on your side and help push this program forward. So again, these are just some very early steps that kind of can be done just to start getting your stakeholders together, getting them on board with your efforts. So this is a typical path that many people will go through as they go through what we call organizational change and starting to change processes and how they do work and how they look at, in this example, for IT. They may very early on start out with a negative approach. It's typically denial, maybe it's anger. Why are you doing this? Why are you changing the way we operate? I've got other things to do. Why are you getting kind of in my way with this? After that, they may translate into fear. They see the program starting to pick up. There's hopefully CIO support for this and executive support, and now they're saying, well, this is pretty serious. So what does this mean to my job? Can I be successful with this? Will this impact the things that I do? So you might see some fear there. Then they move eventually over to acceptance at some point. If you've done a good job, they'll eventually start to accept and get on board with what you're doing. And that's a good point to be. But one of the key things that's been seen in some studies is you need to keep managing that acceptance. They may accept this initially, and then you might see, if you're not paying attention, they might start to slip back to the old way of doing things. So again, your organizational change plan and strategies and approach and the steps you take are really to help manage this, manage the expectations, and help move people along as they go forward. In saying all this, experience has shown that probably 99.9% of the people in your organization really want you to succeed at what you're doing. They're not out there to see you fail. But they do have their own objectives. They've got other issues that they are being pressured on within the company. And so you need to make sure you understand what those are and pull all this together. Otherwise, they will just naturally tend to slip back and either resist or maybe just not support what you're doing here. So, again, these are all reasons why a program of organizational change is so critical, and you want to get that in place as you're going through the visioning step to start to get a view in terms of how that's going to look. So selling the ITIL implementation program, the key factors for success are senior management commitment, stakeholder commitment, having a skilled and available project team and resource, clear benefits and agreement on vision and approach. Again, that's why the whole purpose of this vision step is to get to that. Making sure that when people have to start working with the new solutions, that the effort to be trained or understand something new or a new way of working, that it doesn't take more than 10% extra time over what they do during the regular day job. And then also make sure you have regular program reviews of each ITIL project in place. This is kind of a way of managing your implementation effort kind of in a meta fashion as you keep going through this. These particular points, these 6 points that are on this slide, were taken from a Boston Consulting Group study that was done about 20 years ago, where they looked at 500 some odd projects and tried to determine what are the success factors within those projects. And so these 6 items popped out as, if these are in place and working, then your project will likely be a success. If you have issues in any one of these areas, then you might be at risk of having your project fail. So to help with that, you have something called the DICE model, D-I-C-E model, which is a spreadsheet. I just want to point that out, that that is included with your program materials that you can download, and it's a good way of looking at your project from day one before you even start to actually predict whether your project's going to be successful or not. And if the model tends to show that it's not going to be successful, you can take some early actions up at the front to try to ensure that success will happen. Rounding out the program vision. Up to this point, we've crafted a vision statement. We put some high-level objectives and goals, maybe a high-level approach in terms of how we're going to get there. Took a look at our stakeholders, who we have to deal with, who's on board, who we may have to push along a little harder. One of the other things we need to do also is what's really happening with the business. Where are those stakeholders really focused? What keeps them up at night? These are examples on this particular slide of some things that may keep them up at night. Maybe they're concerned about their overall customer satisfaction. Maybe the business is either growing or maybe it's not growing. Maybe it's shrinking. Maybe there's an impending merger or acquisition out there. Maybe they're concerned about IT costs, or maybe there's a consolidation effort that's going on. So what's really in the heads of your stakeholders, and what are they really thinking about? We want to make sure that our vision and our goals and our efforts line up with what these stakeholders are kind of looking at, because we want to make sure that we're going to provide some value with what we do, as well as make sure people are in agreement and come on board. So to help you with this, we have some survey types of documents that are fairly simple surveys that can be done either individually or in a workshop setting, where you can go out to your stakeholders and start to pull some of this information together. And I think you'll find those surveys very helpful. They are, again, included with the materials that can be downloaded with the course. And I think I'd like to now explain what some of these surveys have and the kinds of information that you might pull out of these. So these are the 5 surveys that are included in your program materials that you can download. We have something called a customer needs survey, an ITSM focus survey, a benefits survey, a labor survey, and a cultural survey. It's really important that when we work with our stakeholders during this visioning work stage, you want to identify aspects of the program that they like to see as benefits. So let's take a look at the labor survey. This is one of my favorite surveys because what the goal of this survey is to identify where do we have unplanned wasted labor happening, especially within the IT organization. This is one of the most powerful surveys you can do when you're looking for trying to put together a return on investment for your ITIL program or start to show what the value of this can be. If you think about this, you have IT staff, and the IT staff are being assigned to various projects or activities that your company likes to make sure they get done in the course of a working day. Interrupting those tasks might be things like maybe incidents that occur where they now have to drop what they're doing and go address the incident, or maybe somebody put a bad change in over the weekend and now everybody's scrambling to deal with that on Monday morning. And so that, again, is time spent that nobody planned on, and it takes time away from them doing actual value labor, as we call it, which would be projects and activities that the company really wants to get done. If you can identify how much of a percentage on just an average week that people spend on this unplanned labor, you have a very powerful piece of information that management understands in a heartbeat that shows the value of what you're going to do. Because one of the goals of implementing any kind of a process is it starts to take out unplanned labor as soon as that process starts to go into place. So this particular survey is very key. Again, it's one of my favorite ones. It takes only 5 minutes to do on the part of anybody, and it just simply identifies typical IT activities and asks them to put a rough cut percentage of time that they think they spend in these different areas. And then under the covers helps you determine which of those activities are really unplanned activities and which are really value activities that are there. So a very good survey to use, and one I would highly recommend when you're trying to put a return on investment together, because you can easily translate that percentage of labor into hours, which then into salaries, and then into dollars, and get very quick numbers to what the company's spending on things like that. No CIO or executive wants to know that his IT people are spending a high percentage of their time on unplanned activities when they're supposed to be doing other things. So again, that's the key message coming out of this survey. The cultural survey is used to assess how much of a barrier your company's culture and attitudes might become when you start implementing your program and it starts to move forward. The results of this are really used as part of your organizational change efforts. So where barriers exist, your program plans and contingencies will have to be made for overcoming them or neutralizing them. The output of this survey will really be used by your implementation program, and it's during that organizational change effort that they will look at where the cultural issues are and try to make efforts to and plan actions in advance to overcome those. Some of the interesting things about the cultural survey, if the scores are really low, you almost want to raise a red flag and say, is this company really ready to implement ITIL? There's chances it could not be. I've been in some organizations where IT will just flat out not talk to the business, and there is no way they will ever talk to the business. Other organizations where decisions are only made by upper management and IT people are never asked to make decisions. Those are things that, when put together, start to create a picture of a company that's really not going to do very well at ITIL at this point in time. Other scores in the middle range might identify areas that you need to address. at least give you a warning that there may be issues to deal with in advance. And certainly if you get a high score, that's great. It probably means you'll have a very good chance of success in your program. Cultural survey, again, is just, it asks different things about the company in very general terms, non-technical terms, and again, these surveys are designed to make that happen within just a 5 or 10 minute time. It's not a lot of effort to fill out. Interpreting the focus survey, the IT Service Management Focus Survey. The purpose of this is we want to identify what key IT issues need to be addressed as a result of your ITIL implementation program. So this is a survey that you will give to your IT managers and executives, not necessarily the staff. But what we're looking for is their perspectives on what IT sees as key issues that need to be addressed, and we'll kind of use this to help determine which processes are primary or secondary. Again, remember, we're going to start by solving a business problem and then identify the processes and the life cycle stages that address that business problem. So this is a survey that can be used to help identify what those business issues are from an IT perspective. The customer needs survey is similar to the ITSM focus survey, except this is really targeted to your end customers and tries to give you an end customer view of what do they really want out of their IT services. Very much in business terms, in terms of the questions and things that are on this survey. Again, very simple to fill out. Doesn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes of anyone's time. But the focus of this particular survey is to identify from a customer business perspective, what are they really looking to get out of their IT solutions? And again, this will help you focus around what areas you want to focus in your implementation effort that you know the business is looking for. The IT Service Management Benefits Survey can be used to help draw out what aspects of your program will be most desired by the stakeholders on your implementation effort. So those stakeholders that you're using to help guide and move your effort forward, what are they really kind of looking for? This will help with which processes to focus on, what initial wins they might want to focus on. What do your stakeholders view as maybe the highest things that they see from their perspective that they want to address? Again, this is non-technical, can be done in 5 or 10 minutes by any one of the stakeholders. And again, the output of this is to help give you input in terms of where you're going to focus your efforts as you go forward. So those are the 5 surveys that are included in your download materials. And again, these are tools that you can use to help drive out what's the business problems that you're really trying to solve and what areas do people really want to focus on where they see some benefit in terms of moving forward. One last step in rounding out our program vision is to develop some form of a graphical end-state delivery model. This is very high level, doesn't need to be very complex. Think of this as almost like a graphic that you will use in your communications as you move forward. This is just one example of what one might look like. I've seen others that look a little bit like discs that are divided into different sections and everything, but it always fits on one page. It's always something that can be easily cut and pasted. But rounding out the vision, we want to include basically just a high-level graphic of what we think the world will look like once our ITIL implementation effort concludes and finishes its first wave. This is the highest level view of how we intend to operate our IT services. Typically, it shows some form at a very high level of the structure and flow once it's in place. And if we did a really good job at this, it's possible that all the future workflows, forms, reports, processes, supporting technologies might actually fit inside this graphic in one box or another box in terms of where it has a place for it. So it's really a way to hold your program together with just a simple graphic and try to communicate what this program's about and what it's actually trying to address. Lesson 3, dealing with resistance. Because we are implementing process solutions, not software solutions, although they may be part of our effort, the real goal here is to change people's behavior in terms of how they operate, the steps and the activities that they work on. So this is really, again, as we stated earlier, a program of organizational change and transformation, much more so than even an IT project. So you can almost expect that some resistance will occur as you start to move forward with this. What I'd like to do with lesson 3 is just give you some common scenarios that are pretty typical and seen quite a bit by other organizations that have been implementing ITIL, and give you some tips and techniques of how you might deal with that. So here's one objection you might get. Why focus on process when we can buy a tool for this? You may even have vendors that say there's no need to design and build a process or go through all that. Our tool will provide the process for you. A couple things to understand. An interesting thing was a Gartner study was done about 3 or 4 years ago looking at IT service outages. And it noted that over 70% of those service outages were really caused by process-related failures, not so much technology failures. One other area I point out is that the vendor themselves, if they say that the process is in our tool, that implies that somebody at the vendor had to think up what process are they working with in order to design and build the tool. Any incident management tool, for example, that any vendor has come out with in the marketplace, there's somebody in that vendor organization that had to think through an incident management process and then build the features and functions into that tool to make some of those things happen and automate some of those tasks. So you need to understand what process did the vendor use or was thinking about when they built the tool, and does that match the process that works within your own organization? Because if it doesn't, you're going to run into lots of issues and problems and a lot of resistance from people in terms of how it works. So you really need to understand your process at some level in terms of how you want to operate first, and then buy the tools that best fit into that approach that you plan to use. Some tools may have some unique functions and features and may drive some lower level activities and lower level processes that you might be using, and that certainly could happen. But overall, you want to make sure that fits into your overall vision of how you plan to operate. Another reason is if you have a bad process and all you simply do is automate it, all you're doing is wasting cost, and there's really very little benefit that's going to come out of that. And again, for tool selection, if that becomes part of your scope, if you don't understand your process to start with, how can you really select the right tool that's going to fit? So there are a lot of reasons of starting with a process. I'm very much an advocate that you start with process, and the purpose of the tools is to simply automate and enforce your process once it's in place. So again, this is a reason for focusing on process, and I know IT doesn't always comfortable with that kind of an approach, but it's really what's happening and what makes sense there. So here's another objection. Why is this a program versus a project? You may get this typically at the executive level. Can't we just implement ITIL and move forward? And again, as we've seen before, service improvement is not something you do once, but it's really an ongoing effort. So as we stated within our implementation approach, we're going to implement the pieces and parts of ITIL that best address some set of business problems, and when we finish that effort, we're going to circle back and see what other problems we need to address or improve or fix, and then execute another set of efforts around that. And we keep doing that. That's the essence of the continual service improvement, which is why that book was written. And that really implies that this is a program. By the way, the definition of a program is that it is ongoing. The definition of a project is it's typically something you do once, but this is really a program more than anything else. So again, that's why if this comes up, that this might be some ideas in terms of how you respond to that. Some people may ask, why is this needed now? We've got other things happening. Why should we be doing this at this point? This would go back to, is your vision and your business problem, set of business problems that you're going to solve with this, did you do a good job with that to the point where people really agreed with that question? If they didn't agree and feel that the goals of this are really not that important, then maybe you need to kind of circle back and recraft what's the goal and vision of why you're doing this again. I tend to be a very strong believer, however, that if an IT organization is operating without some form of idle IT service management good practices, there's no way that they could be operating efficiently well or probably even meeting the needs of the business. So these are just some things that stick out. Again, these can go back to the goals and your vision in terms of why you're doing this. Typical things might be, again, the rate of change for the business is going so fast that if you don't have some way of coping with that, you're just going to fall farther and farther behind. You might be in a competitive situation and competitors are implementing ITSM initiatives, and that's going to leave your organization behind. I always use this one. If there's a big application development effort going, if they can't operate and deploy it on a day-to-day basis at acceptable cost and risk, then that investment is wasted. So maybe an idle set of good practices and program needs to be in place to make sure that can happen. Protect those investments in IT that are being made. So again, these are examples of how you might respond back to why something is needed now. If that becomes a huge issue in your organization, again, I would start to go back and look at your original goals and vision and the business problems you were hoping to address. It's possible maybe those really weren't a priority with the organization. I've seen this happen a few times with idle implementation efforts where the IT department is saying, why can't we just do this in IT? Why do we need to get the business involved? And again, you can't do idle and IT service management without the business being involved. That just doesn't work any other way. If the business is not involved, or even doesn't want to be involved, essentially what they're saying is that IT is now going to dictate how the business is going to operate, and I don't think anybody in the organization wants that to happen. You need to get close to the business. You need to understand what they're doing. You need to use their time and participation wisely on this effort, but you still need their opinions, their thoughts, their agreement in terms of some of the services and solutions that you're planning to put into place. Very typical response. I usually find this more in the IT department than anything else. We've got a lot of other priorities. Why do we need to devote resources to this now? We've got application projects. We've got maybe server installs or a consolidation effort. Why do we care about getting involved in an idle effort at this point in time? This is where that labor survey that we looked at earlier becomes very, very critical. I would urge you, if you have this as a challenge where people are just saying we're too busy to do idle, go and pull that labor survey and pull those results out, and I think you'll be surprised at what you see, and that will turn people's heads around, certainly the executive level, if not at the staff level. So that's a good approach, I think, for dealing with this, because what that actually says is people are too busy doing things with all that unplanned labor and time to the point where they're really not getting as much done as they think they are. So the labor survey is a good defensive effort that you can use here. You may see this, especially in today's economic challenges that are occurring today. This will add staff. We're currently under a mandate to cut staff, so we just don't have the staff to do this effort. One of the things I like to point out is that if your organization is cutting IT staff, and again we go back to our labor survey, if you have unplanned IT labor that's going on, and you're cutting staff in that kind of a situation, what you've actually done now is you've increased the percentage of unplanned labor that the people that are still working at the company will have to deal with. So unless you make those incidents and bad changes and all those things go away, then the people that are left have to start dealing with those, and that takes additional time away from what they were hired to do as well. So again, that non-value ratio may actually go up if you don't implement something. Now, if you're really under a financial constraint and staff absolutely has to either not be added or actually cut, then you may want to look at the scope and scale of your idle implementation program and try to scale that down to what's most important that would provide the most benefit at an early point in time. But again, this is another area we might see some things as well. And again, these are just some things you can apply to that if that happens. Why do we need organizational change skills in this effort? This one will come typically from the IT department. IT does not like organizational change. They view that as kind of politics, it's fluff. They've got installation efforts and things to fix and solve and do, and typically don't like to focus on things like stakeholder management and messaging and all that kind of stuff. Again, I would point out the needs to this are that without this, the program will just simply fail. I have not seen an ITIL implementation effort successfully get put into place any other way other than that's there. I have seen typically some senior executives that will say, I don't think we need to do organizational change. I'm just going to fire somebody if they don't follow the rules. My observations, and I've seen that put into place a couple of times, is that lasts only about 5 or 6 weeks. At that point, the rest of the IT staff starts to revolt because that action creates more resistance than anything else. And then more importantly, once that executive leaves or moves position or changes responsibilities, the whole program falls apart again. So you really need to focus again on organizational change, very key to what you're doing. And again, don't underestimate the effort for this. As I cite, other implementations typically will say 70 to 80% of their time is spent on that particular effort. So if all else fails, this is one rule I've used successfully, and it seems to always work. And that is that almost no one rejects a solution that they felt they had a hand in building. So if everybody feels that they contributed to your ITIL program, to your ITIL success, chances are they'll be on board with the program and the activities and solutions that are being put into place. So now the next question comes up, well, there could be a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people. How do we do that without putting the world's largest project team together? And that's why I want to bring you to the next slide and just introduce a concept that we'll talk about a little more actually in some future modules, but I want to at least introduce you to what's there. Again, we'll talk about this more in detail when we get into the planning stages and the organization stages, but just to introduce you to the concept of how you're going to organize your team to deal with organizational change and your ITIL implementation effort. And that's to think in terms of these 4 key roles, and I'm using the term participation roles on this effort. One is the core team, then the extended team, the advisor team, and the subject matter expert. The core team will be your actual hands-on people working with ITIL, implementing the various processes or technologies or whatever. Those are the people actually doing the work, and that's your core team. Your extended team will be representatives from your different business units, other IT areas, other areas of the business possibly, and they will have a dual responsibility. The first responsibility is they represent the interests of that particular area that they represent. And the second responsibility is they work with your team on a part-time basis to help you craft some of the solutions you're doing from their perspectives. So let's say you develop a new change management process. That team may help give you input in terms of what goes into that process. And when you've now drafted that process, you'll now shop that with that extended team. They will have the responsibility of taking that process back out to their organization and then running that through the people that they represent to see if there's agreement or other issues that work with that. So they kind of work both ends of the stick, both with the core team as well as with the units that they represent. Very important role here. The advisor team are just simply senior executives that have a financial stake or need to be escalated to make a key decision as you move forward. The participation of the advisor team is really up to them. I typically use a 2 hours a month type of benchmark. Some advisors like to get more involved than others. You may have a key executive that just simply wants to see your project status reports and maybe outcomes of what you're doing, kind of a need-to-know basis, and that's certainly okay as well. And then your subject matter experts will be just experts in particular areas, either tools, technologies, processes, maybe some business areas within your company, but they're going to provide expertise to your team when it's needed. So it's just simply another role as you move forward. That can be a part-time or full-time role. It really depends on what you need there. But I wanted to introduce these concepts up at the front. You'll see these later as we get farther down into some of the learning modules. But having and organizing your project and program in the way of a core team, extended team, advisor team, and subject matter experts has worked very well with very large companies that have lots of organizations, lots of different interests, and really just help drive the solution through very effectively. I kind of stuck this in there in terms of the final frontier. So you've tried all the resistance methods. Nothing seems to work. What this really does is I kind of reverse the situation, and I've done this in a very extreme case. If somebody is really resisting this and saying, finally at the end of the day, okay, this is what you're really saying. So you're already saying that the customers agree that you deliver good IT service and they're really happy with what you're delivering. You're saying that your business is really not growing and it's not declining. You don't have any major technology changes planned. Your costs are very acceptable to the company. You kind of get the drift of this as you're painting a very rosy scenario, and you're kind of throwing this back up in their face and saying, so you absolutely agree with this. Sometimes it just helps them see the light a little bit in terms of what you're really trying to do and what you're working with. Hopefully you don't have to get this far there, but I kind of just threw this in as kind of just a last approach that you can use with people if they just don't seem to understand what you're trying to do, or just keep resisting after you've tried everything else. So this brings us to the end of Module 2. At this point, we talked a lot about crafting a vision, making it compelling, identifying some very high-level approaches and objectives, identifying your stakeholders, and then how to deal with resistance. Hopefully you found this very helpful in terms of just getting started, but want to urge you again that this is a very critical step in your implementation effort. You will be glad you've done this as you keep moving forward, because you'll see that in terms of people understanding how your program's working, what it's set out to achieve. And as management keeps asking those questions, why are we doing this, or what are we getting for our money, you've got a ready answer already there. Not only that, they've agreed to that up at the front. So you've made that very clear for everybody, and that makes this a lot easier to work with and deal as you keep moving forward. So moving ahead, for our module number 3, we're now going to move to our next step, which is the IT Service Management Assessment. And in that learning module, we're going to focus on conducting ITSM assessments. The approach we use in this training course is very comprehensive. This is not just the processes that you'll be assessing, but the technologies, the organization, and the governance of that organization as well. And that will help drive out a lot of the holistic approaches and solutions that you're going to use to keep moving forward. In Module 3, we're going to cover the assessments and some tips and techniques around how those assessments are done. And in Module 4, as we get beyond that, we'll actually see how we take the results of those assessments and translate those to initial wins and actual action plans as we move forward.